Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Oliver Crocco. I go by Ozzie, and I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Leadership and Human Resource Development at Louisiana State University, or LSU, in the United States. Great to be speaking with you all. I was invited by Dr. Bob Aubrey once again to share a short video, this time covering a few highlights from my newly published book, which is called Developing Human Resources in Southeast Asia, a holistic framework for the ASEAN community. And, right at the outset, I should say that despite the title of my book being Developing Human Resources, using the R word, that my conviction is that we should move away from that term and more towards a term like human development. However, I decided to use this term because it was the most commonly used in the ASEAN publications, ASEAN documents. Um, and so I decided to go that way in terms of accessibility and helping people locate it. But I think my next book will likely not use that title. So today's video is just three quick takeaways for you, specifically regarding measurement. Um, and they're a little bit macro, a little bit broad, but I'd start with first sharing one of the contributions of this book is this model and thinking about the ecosystem of human development in Southeast Asia. So when you look at this, you'll see that there are three content dimensions. Those content dimensions, there are macro content dimensions, things like culture, government support and regulation for human development, ASEAN and ASEAN's initiatives in human development. Regional talent mobility is one of the content dimensions of human development. And then at the meso layer, we have educational institutions, specifically higher education, family and peer networks. Those influence the ecosystem as well, as you can imagine, particularly in the Southeast Asian context. Professional networks, international organizations, and consultant networks. When you think about these content dimensions, these are the pieces that make up this ecosystem, and they're constantly influencing one another and mutually constituting one another. They're even making one another up as they go. And then at the center, the core piece of content in this ecosystem is the employees and workers themselves, and really those organizations, those local units, those subsidiaries. And so we have those three content dimensions. We also have four processes that occur because this ecosystem is constantly in flux. And so we have the emergence of human development practices and processes. We have convergence across the 11 countries of Southeast Asia. So, if one country is doing something, others might mimic that, or, we're all going to try and do this same thing. There's also very important divergence in human development practices and processes in this ecosystem. And there is this continual process of learning and adaptation as you go. So as organizations, individuals, governments are learning more about human development and what they're doing, they're constantly adapting to the environment around them. And speaking of that, it should be noted that at all times, this whole ecosystem of human development in Southeast Asia is being influenced by forces such as politics, economics, technology, the environment, and legal forces. So really, it's meant to demonstrate the flux. While there are certain content, pieces of content that are there, these are all in flux, overlapping, mutually constituting. And if you want to know more about this and some of my as I unpack each of these pieces, you can check out the book. So with regard to measurement, so a model is one way. If I go back to this model, a model is one way to conceptualize something based on the data that I found. So this is sort of very macro thinking, and this is sort of the result of looking at data. But as we drive down deeper, here's a snapshot of some of the data I found that informed this this book and this model, and it looked at intra Southeast Asian migration. So within the countries of Southeast Asia, how many people are migrating to a different Southeast Asian country, for example, either for the short term or for longer term, and what percentage of those migrants is that of all the migrants of that country. So, for example, if you just take Brunei, in 1990, there were 3,340 migrants from Brunei to other Southeast Asian countries. And that only made up 13% of all the migrants from Brunei. Whereas if you look at a country like Malaysia, they had 242,549 migrants to other Southeast Asian countries, and that made up a whopping 43% of all Malaysian migrants. Now, that's 1990. Fast forward nearly 20 years, and you have, for me, the big thing that you can see is not necessarily the increase in migrants. Yes, there was dramatic increase overall in migrants, but what's most interesting is that, to me at least, is that the percent of migrants from Southeast Asian countries to other Southeast Asian countries increased as a percentage. So, and this didn't happen with all countries, for example, the Philippines, but take, for example, if we look at, for example, Lao PDR. In 1990, only 35% of migrants from Lao were to other Southeast Asian countries. But that has doubled in 2019, and that now all the migrants that have left Laos, 70% of them are in Southeast Asia, which is pretty incredible. You have 65% of Cambodian migrants are in Southeast Asia, 60% of Malaysian migrants, 60% of Burmese, 35% of Singaporeans, 60% of Timor-Leste. So what you see here is that I think is pretty interesting, and it's a result, I think, of the work of ASEAN, what ASEAN's doing to really make the ASEAN community in Southeast Asia. And the implications of this for human development, I think, are massive. And I think it's why an organization like the ASEAN Human Development Organization, has quite a lot on their hands, because there's a lot of work to do on how to really make thriving organizations where you have people from all over the region working in those places. The last slide I'll share with you today is looking at human resource development, specifically training, formal training in organizations. And I think this is just something that's interesting to talk about that arose from the data. If you look at the first column, now not every country is included in this in Southeast Asia. This is the enterprise surveys from the World Bank. And unfortunately, they don't have data, but they look at large firms, those are 100 and more, medium firms and small firms, and ask them a series of questions, and that data is available. It's quite interesting. So if you look at this most recent survey, look at the third column, actually, which is the percent of firms identifying an inadequately educated workforce as a major constraint. You will see that you have 17%, for example, in Cambodia. Not so surprising given the state of their higher education at the moment. There are some pockets of really excellent work, but a lot of work yet to be done. 13% Timor-Leste, 10% as an average of all countries in Southeast Asia. But then you look at the first column, which is percent of firms offering formal training. And with the exception of the Philippines, most of them are under a quarter. So most of them, and the average for Southeast Asia is 20%. So you would think that if the percent of firms identifying an inadequately educated workforce as a major constraint was above 10%, that the percent of firms would be that are offering formal training would be quite high. Unfortunately, it's still quite low. And if you look at the globe, if you compare that to East Asia and the Pacific at 34% of firms, and the global average of 32.3% of firms, Southeast Asia is quite low in terms of offering training. And I think training is a key mechanism for facilitating human development in organizations, especially where an inadequately educated workforce is a major constraint. So I will conclude by just saying, first of all, thank you for that, for listening to that short video, and also that um, I think numbers and measurement is really important for helping to paint a picture, and especially starting big picture, starting macro to see, what's going on in the world. But at the end of the day, if you really want to know what's going on in organizations, and if you're really interested in human development at the individual level, measurement is also really important and to speak with people and talk with them and identify their needs, their growth areas, their desires, and that's really ultimately, I think, the most accurate way. Although at that point, when you start doing, for example, qualitative surveys to understand um, human development at the individual level, then you really start to you miss out on the chance to generalize, for example, throughout a country or certainly throughout the region because you're digging down into that individual level. So, anyways, so much to talk about in terms of measurement, but I hope that this short little video was interesting to you. This book is an academic book. It is quite expensive, unfortunately. It is not really meant to be read. Um, by a bunch of individuals because of the high price point. However, my hope is that it does make its way to many libraries in Southeast Asia. Libraries typically have the ability to purchase these types of books. It's an academic reference book. And certainly, if there's a chapter you're interested in, please get in touch and I'll see if I can get that to you. So, thank you very much. Wishing you all a great module. Take care. Bye bye.